And you're right, veils is very important, because also in Blake's mythology, his cosmogony, he had Vala, one of these demiurgic Zoas, a kind of emanation, a kind of female version of Urizen, you see, who is the veil in that sense is Maya. It is a delusion. So yeah, you're quite right there. And also, what has happened? What Pluto is, remember I said it's experienced by most people as destructive, and I said it was constructive. How can that be? It's because Pluto's ultimate mandate is to get you back to the roots. The Apollonian takes you away from the roots. It does give you the heady perspective of the mountaintop, and we need that. We want that. But to try and build your palaces on that little peak where the hermit stands, in the end has downsides. But let's go to the next slide. So basically there's the old man now remembering himself, remembering the day when they did this. So in other words, remember, I'm saying that a crime was committed. So when they locked the doors and they locked themselves in, what were they doing? He says we were sealing ourselves off from humanity's suffering so that they could have this perfect technocracy, this perfect technocratic world. You know, and on a one level, you can understand it. There's a lot of people today, your Stephen Thalers, this Kurzweil, and all these other chumps, they're itching to do something. In fact, they live in a sort of a ivory towers themselves, the way they go about, but they'd love that for the rest. And some people are really willing to sign on for that. Why? Because like we've said in other work, and we said even in the last hour about the nature of children, it's very it's discomfortable, uncomfortable to be in touch with those fuming emotions that are fuming beneath the surface. And so the promise of these heady, clean, super lit, fluorescent, you know, when we do Blake 7, we'll see the whole thing laid out for us. Controlled environments, you see. But anyway, back to the point. He's remembering himself and what they've done. But look at the beauty of what Zardoz is saying, is that in order to even initiate this experiment, already a crime was involved. A crime against the fundamental tenets of nature, which they haven't learned through their hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So ontology, yeah, like Heidegger's foundational ontology, Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology. If you don't even know what the real lineaments of reality are, all your stuff that you think you're doing, you're not even plugged in. You haven't even been instructed. In fact, Heidegger, like Patrick McGowan, was of the belief that we have modernized too quickly. We got away from he believed that in the centuries past, rural man was being instructed by nature, and that modernity cut us off from the tuition. Right. So in other words, these people saw nature as the school. Like I told you, he used to walk some of the top intellectuals of his school into the courtyard to look at a little simple tree that was growing there. He used to do this. He says, why have we built walls around this tree? We should have trees around our walls. This is the teacher. And we're like, what? Of course, in German, it sounds more extraordinary in that language. And that's what he was famous for. But the thing is that there's a crime already done. So Pluto is constructive because it gets us back to those roots that we have lost, right? Now, in other words, in concepts of Zardoz, they didn't learn these ontological facts. They moved away from their own psychology. And in order to create one kind of panacea, they created a new form of suffering. They created a new kind of scission in which they're separating from the ground of being, right? Which is what Nietzsche again talked about with Apollonian and the Dionysian. What did they do? They ostensibly, consciously, they set themselves the task of gaining all knowledge, finding out what it's all about, cracking the mysteries, just like all these people in scientism today. And it's a very hypnotic idea. You see, the 4 or 5 greatest mathematicians in the world, 3 of them went mad and 1 shot himself, you know, or two killed himself. I can't remember what, but it was a total meltdown. These are the greatest brains in real life trying to crack, you know, Alan Turing and others. I can't remember their names right now. But they went bloody mad, all right, trying to do exactly what this Zardoz is trying to show you. And as you said in last hour, they even admit in the film that they ventured out into space, into the voids of space, and that was a freaking dead end, as, you know, the static. There's the synonym again for static reality. In other words, they didn't find their answers there. And that certainly brings in the Heideggerian principle, which is that being is concealed. Being is concealment. Being is not concealed, it is concealment. So you're not going to erase that. You're reaching out for the very knowledge of what is, pushes it away, because it's conquestative and it's territorialized and it's ichthyphalic. and it's not available to the head, which is this conceptual apparatus. There's a whole other compartment, that Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty were talking about. But this is an extraordinary, brilliant scene, as the old scientist remembers. In other words, they're thinking they're doing something good, but they're actually creating a fundamental crime that now comes to seek them out.
Yeah, and crime in capital letters. I mean, we were talking about how it's a crime, how we're divorced from nature. This is this is getting right into the very biology of a person. Ostensibly on the surface, it is about their questing for knowledge and their continuing of civilization, but underneath it's actually escaping from existence, is creating a new kind of existence. This is where considering the immortals, the eternals, this is where I really see Heidegger. I've actually never seen a movie deal with immortality in this way, because it's I think it's really, I mean, so many people and so many religions promise you immortality. They don't really tell you what exactly that entails and what that would actually be like, because I think for Heidegger, limits and death and finitude weren't emblematic of something that of a flaw in nature. They're the very things which allow being to find its shape and form. Death, the dissolving of being, is what distinguishes Dasein from other beings, and not just an awareness of your death, because there's a lot of neurotic people that are aware that they're going to die, but it's how you're oriented towards it. And he calls this being towards death. That death simultaneously being the end of being, and also essential to Dasein's highest possible potential, and it's one's own most. That's why I bring this up. It's probably one of the most non-relatable things. You die your own death. Yeah. So it's that's the foundation. One of the absolute signifiers that you are a singular and particular entity in the world. So any attempt to erase that, to erase those limits and those borders, those parameters of your lifespan, and to get in the way of that, just like how they're all linked by one mind, it's a crime of I mean, it has propelled them into a realm in which they've lost all form, all meaning, and just live in this state of absurdity and error and evil.
And if people have been following, I agree. And if people have been following some of the podcasts we've done, David, you'll remember that we always throw in, mostly anecdotally, these refutations to the materialists, these Sam Harrises and all, when they talk about, and Daniel Dennett and others of their school, where they say there's no self. What Adam has just described there, Heidegger's being unto death, is the final refutation of, or is one of the major refutations of this concept of selflessness, because not only are we finite beings who have this death awaiting us, but as he's described just now, it is a very individualistic thing. So there must be a self who is having that anxiety, who's having that comportment towards death. So I have no idea how these American and British so-called philosophers dare talk about, not having a self. It's just absolutely extraordinary, because, we should make a note for our audience. Again, watch out for that. It is lies. And Heidegger's being unto death concept, and how that then makes your individualism more vivid. In other words, your selfhood more vivid, because one day that selfhood's going to end. Well, if it ends, Mr. Harris, what and whom does it end to? It isn't anybody else's death. It is your finitude. It is your death. And it is your contemplation of that moment of finitude that entirely transforms the existential nature of your life. If you were not a self, then everything I've just said is utterly vacuous and pointless. And it isn't. So you can imagine, again, here we are, people shying away from German thought, and there's a damn good reason, history, why they're doing that as well. But just the simple fact that these people are disingenuously misinforming us, you see, of these principles that have already been expounded by some of the greatest minds in the world is sickening, But we should run on. We should really get on with this. So let's go to the next slide here. There's a very important scene